Welcome back to the Torque Test channel. Today we take a stroll down the cordless aisle at your local hardware store, let's say Lowe's in this case. And if you're on the lookout for a new cordless ratchet, do you go with the all-new just released DeWalt 20-volt atomic? Or maybe something more reasonably priced, but from brands you still might know, the Craftsman V20 or Kobalt 24-volt? Or maybe even the 12-volt Xtreme model DeWalt has had out for a couple months already, a Milwaukee instead. Some results that legit surprised us on this one, something we don't go into testing ratchets expecting, and not all of them made it all the way through testing, which led us to be able to 100% recommend just one ratchet from today. So let's dive in. This is the new DCF503 from DeWalt that we borrowed thanks to a viewer by the name of Mike Burris on Instagram who wanted to see it tested. And to be frank, not sure we had originally planned to test this 20-volt version, as we've already tested the quite good 12-volt Xtreme flavor of it and just assumed it would sort of be the same. Higher voltage doesn't scream more power to me in a ratchet category, but I guess we're going to see. DeWalt is saying the same 250 RPM, but 70 foot-pounds now instead of 60 foot-pounds from their 12-volt, something we'll be testing, for about $20 more or 199 bucks. And their heads are slightly different, oddly. Besides the sort of chrome versus black center section you see on these tools, they do measure differently too. The 12-volt ratchet head is bigger. It's wider at 1.55 inches versus 1.49 of the 20-volt. This 20-volt with a power stack, though, makes it weigh the same despite the larger overall size, and the power stack is sort of where I see the appeal for this 20-volt version. This form factor and weight of a battery makes this size of thing reasonable compared to other 18 and 20-volt options that are just cumbersome. And speaking of those, enter another cordless ratchet made from the same outfit as DeWalt, the Craftsman CMC 930B. This one has a much smaller head, but in a way that's sort of cheating because its large shoulders are also so close to that head, making the small in size head not likely gain you too much more access. This is a 35 foot-pound rated model for 99 bucks and should bring more RPM, or 300 as they advertise. Our smallest V20 battery is a 4 amp hour, so that will just have to do for now, though admittedly looks pretty awkward on here. A 2 amp hour would be more reasonable. Last up and from the same store, the Kobalt KRW124B-03, which is a 24 volt. This advertises the same 250 RPM as the DeWalt, but 55 foot-pounds. However, rumor has it that this thing packs a punch in the torque department, even compared to other equally high torque rated ratchets. So we're happy to shine some light on that today. At $129, it's still more reasonably priced, and we have both 2 amp hour and their 4 amp hour Ultimate Output XTR style battery to try out. We can already score a few things from these tools now though, so let's see that. On this ranking, you do not want points. So starting below the 12-volt DeWalt for now, the DeWalt in 20-volt weighs about the same, which is awesome when using a power stack. It gets the same 30 points. The 24-volt Kobalt is much heavier at 4.1 pounds, so 41 points, and 3.36 or 34 points for the Craftsman. The 20-volt DeWalt has a smaller head, which is strange for a higher torque model, and gets 35 points here as a function of that head cross-section dimensionally. But that's 40 points for the quite large Kobalt's head, and 25 for the Craftsman, which again is sort of just cheating considering its shoulder, but hard to score otherwise. For the price, the Atomic DeWalt's getting dinged here, 40 points, then 26 and 20. On our Gauntlet, time has been the true divider on this series in my opinion. That advertised free speed becomes very much not free speed in real life, so we use nylon lock nuts to represent a load on the tool, ranging from 4 to 15 foot-pounds, representing some rust or just imperfect threads. Each tool gets all new hardware as usual on this channel. If they make enough torque on larger bolts, they don't need help by hand, and that helps them make up time there. Our first matchup is Kobalt versus the M12 because that's an interesting comparison in my opinion. The 200 RPM 55 foot-pound M12 up top, the 250 RPM 55 foot-pound Kobalt on bottom. This matchup is a good one. The head on the M12 is in real life thicker, but the switch on top of that Kobalt rotating around as it does represents as much and more of an obstruction, so an effectively larger space is taken up, though admittedly easier to switch from forward or reverse on that one. As you see here, these two are very evenly matched, despite one being 12 volt and the other one 24 volt, one being extended reach and the other well being accidentally extended sort of reach, just being in its large 24 volt format, and a $100 price difference between them, which is about 50% in this category. Though if you buy the shorter version of this M12, you get the same performance for less money. This far into the test, and this is the most evenly matched two ratchets we've tested yet. The Kobalt starts to make gains on torqued fasteners, loosening them with just a trigger pull where the M12 needs some hand assistance, costing it precious seconds, but under the load on larger half-inch thread lock nuts, the M12 gains some ground, turning 2.5 RPM on these versus the Kobalt's 1.9 RPM, showing you just how much those 200 and 250 RPM free speed numbers can mean very little. All this boils down to the Kobalt finishing 3 seconds after the higher torque version of an M12 model, or 3 minutes and 13 seconds, 193 total, pretty close to the M12. Now here's the 300 RPM 35 foot-pound Craftsman on top, Kobalt still on bottom. The Craftsman with its higher RPM rating does deliver on that aspect and moves out ahead on smaller fasteners that take up the bulk of this Gauntlet's testing time due to more threads per inch and therefore more turns needed to unthread the nut. Also, that's a bit more realistic to how you'd be using these on those size fasteners for these tools. Both of these tools are using a 4 amp hour battery, the Kobalt's being their ultimate output variety. The Craftsman needed hand help on the 25 foot-pound and 35 foot-pound nuts, tied for earliest assistance needed from ratchets that we've tested, while the Kobalt breezes through almost all of the nuts on this test, even some at the very end, so this is where it makes up some of its time, but not quite enough of that time, and the Craftsman finishes in 2 minutes and 51 seconds, 171 total, beating the Kobalt. So remember those times, 3 minutes and 13 seconds and 2 minutes and 51 seconds, because we're going to be testing DeWalt versus DeWalt next, because that's just what we really want to know, 20 volt versus 12 volt, and let me tell you, that brings the most discoveries. So let's check it out. The new 20 volt on the bottom, the 12 volt Xtreme with its chrome headpiece on top. So what you're seeing here being played out, spoiler alert, is basically the same across this whole run. The 12 volt model on top, rated for the same RPM but 10 foot-pounds less, runs faster under load, under all loads, under all sizes, not by a huge margin, but consistently across the run, each and every step. There's a few things here that we wanted to check because there's plenty of reason to second guess this sort of thing. For one, this stud, which we hadn't noticed until now, was sort of threading down by itself instead of the nut, but when timing the intervals, this stud took more time to thread down than the others, and that counts for 1 second of slowdown, not the other way around speeding it up. Maybe the 12 volt is faster on small stuff and slower on big stuff? Well, except for a case where the 20 volt didn't need help by hand and the 12 volt did, when we're just talking RPMs across all of the threads, it is faster pretty much universally. For instance, 3.5 RPM on these big threads versus the 20 volts 2.5 to 3 RPM. Maybe it's the battery. Well, at the end of the run, the power stack was still showing full charge unbelievably, and with a huge 5 amp hour battery, we did the same gauntlet again, and it finished within 3 seconds of this result. The 20 volt atomic DeWalt, rated for the same RPM, is just slower. Here's what those split times look like. If you're curious, we dove into them because it just seems so weird to me. Almost nowhere on 4 foot-pound to 15 foot-pound load stuff is the 20 volt faster. Here's a graph of what that difference looks like in seconds, slower being better. The 12 volt seeing the most difference in around 10 foot-pounds resistance on 7/16 threads. You see this sort of up and down action happening because every 3 bolts is a loosening rather than tightening example. As a matter of fact, Mike, who we borrowed this from, noticed this too, so he measured the free speed with the 12 volt tool seeing 290 and the atomic seeing 260 RPM. So let's see if that's due to a big difference in torque then, as the atomic was able to loosen more stuff with just a trigger pull. Here's the atomic with a power stack and the least eventful dyno session this rig ever sees, ratchets. So 72, and it isn't able to be convinced higher than that 72. Now here it is with a 5 amp hour we also tested it with, though we'd never really use it like this, very awkward to hold. That's 75 and looks like it can be convinced up to 78. Above its claim, so not bad. When ratcheting by hand, the atomic feels pretty good and solid. We hit about 175 foot-pounds with this before not really having enough leverage to do any further. That's good stuff. Kobalt up next. This is the only ratchet we've tested that was able to loosen some of the nuts on the tail end of our gauntlet with just a press of the trigger, but only advertises 55 foot-pounds. Let's see. 66 foot-pounds. Up to 70, and that's with a 2 amp hour battery. Now here it is with a 4 amp hour XTR battery. 80 foot-pounds. 82 even. That's some beans for a cordless ratchet. Not saying battery size should make a difference on these tools, but, well, them's the numbers. The length of this tool allowed us to also use it by hand up to and past 200 foot-pounds. No issue. That's very good. Last up is Craftsman before we rank all of our findings. The Craftsman sees 32 foot-pounds with the pull of the trigger, and that reaches as high as 36 with another go at it. Rated for 35 seems about right. When used by hand though, we did run into some trouble. The small head on the V20 isn't helping a lot in the space department given its body size, and also isn't helping it here. It skips at 125 foot-pounds, and that skip was more like a strip because the tool's now seized up and would no longer function. KO'd. Frankly, the Craftsman didn't sound very happy after its gauntlet run, even free spinning, like a box of rocks. Now, 125 foot-pounds is excessive for hand use, I agree on these, but also the lowest torque death to date we've seen. Now let's visit the rank chart and total some things. The 20 volt atomic is slower than the 12 volt, no real way around that, 160 seconds, that's 160 points here. We're able to shave 78 of those points off with more torque here, but not night and day compared to that already underrated 12 volt, just 6 foot-pounds is what we saw. The Kobalt saw even more torque, but is geared in a way to realize that torque and slower for it, 193 seconds. The Craftsman is faster but less torque and died on us, so you should consider those things if you're looking at this price range. All this totals 187, 218, and 214, ordering them like this. Which means the atomic, because it costs more and finishes slower, is ranked below the rigid in Ryobi, where its 12 volt brother is above nearly everything else we've tested. With the Kobalt placing just above the slower high torque M12 version for bringing similar pace, more torque, but less coin. A good buy on that one if you're looking for that sort of footprint of a cordless ratchet. And the Craftsman is higher still, mainly because it was quicker, it's less coin, and it gets more points over here for a smaller head, even though it's not very effective. But I'd personally take that Kobalt all day over it. And while the atomic ain't bad when you look at it here, and with the power stack isn't a burden, the 12 volt Xtreme model just happens to be, oddly and I find fascinatingly, better. For less money, is smaller and more similar torque than DeWalt might be leading on. Seems like a clear winner to me, though many of you are just looking for ratchets that already fit your battery line, I'm sure. I understand that. Appreciate you joining us for this one. Click subscribe to see more stuff like this every Friday. And thanks for watching.